Hi, I'm Paul Pakusch. I wanted to try living out of my minivan for a couple of weeks without any specific destination in mind. I decided to go west. I ended up seeing such places as Devil's Tower, Mackinac Island, Painted Desert, Yellowstone Park and Old Faithful, Mount Rushmore, and Red Rock Amphitheatre. This was a solo trip in the middle of the COVID lockdown. My plan was to isolate myself in my minivan and just enjoy the view. I would avoid contact with other people by keeping my distance and not eating at any restaurants. I bought food that I could keep in an ice cooler. I put a single mattress in the back of my van and had 3 small suitcases alongside of it that would serve as makeshift dresser drawers. I bought enough changes of clothes to last several days and otherwise planned to stop at laundromats as needed. I put my ice chest next to the side door behind the driver's seat so I could access it either from outside or from inside. I bought bags of ice once a day to keep it filled. I had other food such as bags of chips and pretzels, granola bars, and bananas in the space behind the center console. It was easy to reach from the driver's seat or from the back, plus a good supply of water bottles. I had a folding chair, my laptop computer, and I used the passenger seat in the front to keep other assorted items. My plan was to search out roadside rest stops and campgrounds to spend the night. Otherwise, I would be constantly on the move. I only planned the first part of the trip. I would make up the rest of it as I went along. The first leg was to leave on July 5th, 2020 from my home in Rochester, New York, and stop in Hamburg to visit my nephew and his family. Then I would stop in the Cleveland area to visit a couple family friends. These were both short visits of about an hour or so. After that, continue through Toledo, past Detroit, and north through Michigan to Mackinac Island. Most of the video that I shot along the road was from my dash cam. I stopped in various places to take photos. I stopped at a roadside rest area the first night. The next morning I started my day in Burt Lake State Park, and then through Indian River, Michigan. I drove across Mackinac Bridge, which is 5 miles long. Cars are not allowed on Mackinac Island, so you have to park your car and take a ferry boat over. For me, the best way to see the island was to rent a bicycle and ride around the perimeter. After getting back to my car, I had no plan for the remainder of my journey, so I decided to head west and Route 2 through Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As I was driving along, I noticed that storm in the distance and figured I would encounter it at some point. I wanted to be sure that I saw Lake Superior since I had never seen it before. On my map, I saw that there was a place called Pictured Rocks Park along the lakeshore, so I headed in that direction. It was a very bumpy road into the park. I did not realize that it would be a 2-mile hike from the parking lot to the park itself. I would have done it, but my radar showed the storm was approaching and I might not have any shelter on my hike. So I turned around and gave up. I drove through the storm for a bit and then decided to stop and take a break in the town of Christmas, of all places. This is the Christmas Casino. Then I continued along Route 28 and found a spot to see Lake Superior even though it was still raining. I continued my drive along Route 28 and 41 through Marquette until I reached Michigami Shores Campground on Lake Michigami. I was able to get a shower and then settle for the evening. The morning of July 7, 2020 was the start of my 3rd day on this journey. I continued on Route 28 to Wakefield, Michigan, then stopped to take a few pictures. I continued into Wisconsin through the cities of Superior, Wisconsin, and Duluth, Minnesota. I crossed the Mississippi River near Warba, Minnesota. It's a much more narrow river than it is further south. I had to watch out for deer crossing on the road. I spent the night at a campground near Waubun, Minnesota. It was an interesting place, set up for festivals and concerts with plenty of graffiti around. It appeared that they had just had a 4th of July party a couple nights before I was there. It turned out I was the only person on the whole grounds that night. It only cost me $10. It gave me a place to take a shower and sleep. There was a thunderstorm that passed through during the night. On July 8, I woke up to a beautiful sunrise and started my drive by going through Hitterdale, Minnesota, population 201. I drove through Fargo, North Dakota, along the Enchanted Highway, which is a collection of the world's largest steel sculptures. North Dakota is especially memorable to me for its miles and miles of driving on relative flat land, passing through the cities of Jamestown, Bismarck, and Dickinson. And then I reached the Painted Canyon where I took a hike. After leaving Painted Canyon, I took a drive through Theodore Roosevelt National Park. After crossing into Montana, I found a roadside rest area to sleep through the night. July 9, I woke up to a Montana sunrise and continued my journey into Yellowstone Park, passing through Billings, Big Timber, Bozeman, and Gardiner. What I had not known before this trip is that Yellowstone Park is basically on top of a gigantic volcano that someday is going to erupt, estimated to be sometime in the hundreds of thousands of years from now. I took a tour of the hot springs, geysers, and mud pots. Old Faithful is not the biggest or the most reliable geyser, but it is the biggest reliable geyser. It was dark by the time I left the Yellowstone Plateau and could not find a spot to legally park for the night. Fortunately, I finally found a hotel with vacancy, so I happily spent the night there since I now had access to a shower. The morning of July 10, I checked out of the hotel and had an absolutely beautiful drive through Wisconsin on my way to Thermopolis to enjoy the hot springs. The scenery was absolutely stunning. It is truly a case of pictures and videos can never do justice to how beautiful it really is. I drove through the Wind River Canyon. I could not help but think about the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. However, this tunnel and the one following it were the real deal, certainly not painted on the side. I checked into a hotel in Thermopolis and took advantage of a nearby laundromat to get my clothes washed. There are multiple businesses that get water from the natural hot springs in the area. One of them is the Star Plunge Water Park. The water in the pool is around 100 degrees, and hot tubs are a little bit warmer. You can swim outside or inside the building. Being such a nice day, naturally I swam outside. I checked out the sauna briefly, but the smell of sulfur was a little bit too strong for me. While I was there, I received a message from my daughter's sister-in-law who had been following my travels on Facebook. She noticed that I was getting closer to Denver and asked if I would be interested in stopping by, so I accepted the offer. The next morning, I backtracked a bit through Wind River Canyon and drove to the Denver area to meet her family for dinner. We were seated outside at a restaurant, which was the norm for this era of the COVID lockdown. After dinner, we went to the famous Red Rock Amphitheatre to walk around. When there are no concerts or events scheduled, the amphitheater is open to the public. I was impressed by how nature seemed to form the perfect spot to create an amphitheater for musical concerts. I even stood on stage in front of all of my adoring fans. After spending the night in a Denver area hotel, on July 12 I headed for Devil's Tower National Monument. I stayed in a KOA campground there that was next to the mountain, if you can call it that. Devil's Tower became a lot more well-known after the release of the 1977 science fiction movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. What was cool about this campground was that they showed the movie every evening on a large TV screen with the actual towers seen right behind it from our seating area. The next morning, July 13, I headed for Mount Rushmore, which was a relatively short drive away. I took advantage of the extra time to get an oil change and a car wash in Rapid City, South Dakota. When I got to Mount Rushmore, I looked around the museum, took a lot of pictures with Mount Rushmore, and enjoyed a short hiking trail near the base. One thing I was learning about this trip was that even though we were in a COVID lockdown, it was not keeping people from enjoying the outdoors. I found many of these open areas to be quite popular and some of the campgrounds to be quite full. I spent the night at a campground near Mount Rushmore. At this point, I found myself positioned to start heading back east towards home on a more southerly route, so I could stop and see more sights. I would have taken a more leisurely pace back home, but circumstances came up that I needed to get home more quickly than I originally anticipated. I estimated it would take about 24 hours to get home from Mount Rushmore. I decided to break it up into two 12-hour days with a stop at a campground about halfway on this journey. Driving home, I went through South Dakota, southern Minnesota, southern Wisconsin, through the Chicago area, and then backtracked through Ohio and Pennsylvania to Rochester, New York. It was a very enjoyable tour for me, and I hope to do more travels like this. I found I do very well living out of my minivan when it's just me. Altogether, I spent less than $1,000 on gas and oil change, a few campsites, and 3 nights in relatively inexpensive hotels. I did post 4 hours worth of raw video from this trip on my YouTube channel, and here is the link to the playlist if you would like to go back and see more of my trip. Thank you for watching. I'm Paul Pakusch. This is Hot Chocolate with Paul. Have a good day.